what we're all doing here is going to be pretty darn significant. And I think that's the intent. Am I right, Happy?
It's for posterior, so we can look back and see where we were.
That's right. So the intent today is to get some guidance and policy interpretation from Health Canada directly, because it's kind of opaque. If you email the abyss and don't hear back from 6 weeks, it kind of puts the brakes on a lot of your projects. So tonight's more about, hopefully you've all read the physical security measure guide and the act, so you kind of know what's going on. But even having done that, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of different ways to meet what their requirements are. And so they're going to talk to us tonight about what that can look like for a micro at the minimum scale. And then we also have DHC coming in to talk about what does the technological approach look like. So you can have logbooks and write people in and out and have keys on locks and do all those things, or you can have door fob access. You can have video surveillance for your micro if you want to. You don't need to. So they're going to talk a little bit about that as well, especially if people who are thinking of starting with micros, scaling to a standard. You definitely want to start building that into your facility from the get-go, so you're not retrofitting in awkward ways in the future. So I'm going to do, so we've got the Cannabis Business Transition Initiative that's putting on things like this. We're funded through the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. We help with business planning and licensing support. And Shannon Ross handles our intakes. So that's her email, that's her phone number. If you do need licensing support, give us a call. We're also doing lending. That's funded through Western Economic Development. We've got lots of money to lend. And we're just trying to find places to put it. So we do commercial loans up to $500,000, including in the cannabis sector, so we're kind of rare in that respect. We've done retail, we've done cultivation, we've done indoor, outdoor. So just, yeah, don't be afraid to pick up the phone, talk to Dawn or talk to reception. So that is a possibility. So I just wanted to see, I think, actually everyone's not here. You're not all micros. We've got some standards. I see we've got some micros. We've got some processors, potentially micro or standard? Micro processing, okay. Anyone doing standard processing? Maybe, okay, a couple. And then retail, one, okay. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Sorry. Was that me talking?
Yeah.
I'm the acting manager, or I'm one of the managers in the Licensing and Security Division. Thank you very much for taking the time to meet with myself and Elaine. Elaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Elaine Saunders. I am a regulatory affairs specialist, and I work directly under Jackie on her team.
And Elaine is very kind. She works in Ottawa, so I think it's like 7:30 their time right now. So she's been kind enough to agree to do this presentation with me. So thank you, Elaine.
I'm actually Friday night.
And I'm actually located here in Vancouver. I'm excited. Hopefully in the near future I get to meet some of you guys over time. So without further ado, we'll move forward with the presentation. Elaine, do you mind?
That's me. Yeah, I'm trying. Just give me 2 seconds. There we go.
Awesome. So we always start off with identifying kind of what are the objectives of this session. We want to provide you basically an overview of physical security requirements under the Cannabis Act, specifically in relation to cultivation, processing, and medical sales licenses. And we're hoping to help basically any applicant or any individual really who wants to better understand what the Cannabis Act and its regulations are about, as well as complying with physical security requirements of the different license classes. We always put this slot up. I actually delivered a presentation this morning at the Islands Agricultural Show, so this is like a go-to slide for every presentation we give. We always want to go back to what the intent of the Cannabis Act when we actually put that into force, what our intent was behind that was. And you actually go to the Act itself, Section 7, it actually identifies these particular criteria that we're using as a guide for our intent, not guide, sorry, using as our guide for our intent around what we are planning to do around the Cannabis Act. So restricting access to youth, controlling access to adults for legal age, providing oversight of the operation of the legal cannabis industry, and strictly regulating the supply chain, as well as establishing strong penalties to protect public health and safety. So whenever it comes to any of the presentations we deliver, we always try and bring it back to what the intent is so that people really understand why we've done certain things. It's always in mind of these particular kind of tenets that we start off from. So one of the things that we always like highlighting as well at the beginning of our presentations is that when it comes to regulated industries, there is a certain level of expectation that you have on us, and there's a level of expectation we have of the industry. So one of the things that we look for is that people understand the Cannabis Act and the regulations and their obligations in respect to all the activities tied to it. Also, we expect that you demonstrate compliance through the licensing process as well as the inspection program. And finally, we also hope that you apply an understanding to all activities, processes, and products at all times. So we expect you to actually understand it and implement it in place at your site. So the cannabis regulations themselves actually set out what the legal requirements are for anyone to conduct certain activities with cannabis. And really, depending on the activity you want to conduct, it dictates what type of license that you want to do. As well as on top of that, there are certain products that you may want to have activities with, and depending on how you want to do that, the products listed here, for example, are cannabis plant seeds, dried and fresh cannabis, cannabis extracts, and cannabis topicals and edibles, are products that you're able to conduct activities with once you obtain the licenses that's required to do those activities with those products. So this slide is a table that we actually have in the license application guide. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to spend some time on your lovely Friday evenings and Saturday nights reading the application guide for cannabis. I think it's figure 2 in the application guide. It is for someone who is interested in working in the cannabis industry. I have a certain mindset of what I want to do for my business plan. Based on that business plan, it dictates to you what kind of license you're going to want to obtain. So for example, I want to grow cannabis. You can get up to 3 different license types for that particular activity. We have standard, which is basically you can grow as much as you want. So there's the sky's the limit. There's no limitations on your actual production size. Versus a micro cultivation, which limits you to 200 meters square. And then a nursery. In that particular case, you're limited to seed and flowering plants up to a maximum of 50 meters squared. But when it comes to non-flowering plants, the sky's the limit. You can have as much as your building or wallets can afford to have in a particular facility. Outside of that, we have licenses for processing. We have two subclasses of that. We have a standard cultivation, again, sky's the limits of whatever your capabilities are available to you, versus a microprocessing is limited to a maximum of 600 kilograms per calendar year, or equivalent of dried marijuana, or in the special case where you actually have a cultivation license as well as a processing license, that's both cultivation and microprocessing. In that case, you're actually able to process everything that your cultivation site produces. So if it produces more than 600 kilograms in that year, you're still able to process that. And then the last one being a medical sales license. So if you are interested in selling to medical patients cannabis products, so that's packaged and labeled product for retail sale, you would want to obtain a sale for medical purposes license. So again, this is from the application guide. It's a table that we use on a regular basis to kind of give people reference. There are certain combination of licenses that you are allowed to have, and there are certain combinations of licenses that you may not have. So for example, a standard and a micro cannot be located within the same site, but a micro and a micro can be located within the same site. And I want to highlight that nurseries are something that we don't allow a combination for the other types of cultivation licenses or processing licenses. So I'm just going to give you guys an overview of the licensing process for a new site. I'm sure some of you in the room may be familiar or even going through the process right now. Oh, yeah, of course. Sorry, go ahead.
Just questions from the audience as to why the nursery isn't allowed on the same site as micro-cultivation and processing.
It was a decision I think that the people in the policy team kind of had to work through. I think what they went under the guise of understanding is that someone who wants to really just be a provider of like genetics would just want to operate on its own, because in that particular case, the reason we don't really necessarily want to blend the two of them is because a micro-cultivator is a maximum of 200 square meters of all total plant production. And that includes flowering and non-flowering, and we have diminished security requirements around that. Versus a nursery, which we deem the lower value product is the non-flowering plants. We're not restricting them, and to be honest, we don't expect that they'll have a mass amount of, and I'm sorry guys, it's been a long day and it's Friday, so it's been my second presentation today, but let me regroup on this one. So basically what it is that when it comes to nurseries, we allow you to have as much as you want when it comes to non-flowering plants, but we don't expect you to have massive non-flowering plants. It's most likely going to be clones that you're going to be having for your sales, for genetics. So for that reason, they decided that we didn't want to allow someone to be able to have those two activities in the same space, because they don't think they really line up with one another very well, because you're kind of blending the two activities. I think I'm failing at giving you an answer right now, and I'm wondering, Elaine, if you want to step in right now. I'm on mute, sorry. I don't think I can express it properly vocally right now, but I'm definitely happy to follow up with a written response that would be much more eloquent than I think that I'm capable of giving in a spoken response just right now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry guys. we will wait for that, Paul, that you guys get a written response on that, and you can share it with everyone who's participating in the meeting today. And I do apologize, guys. It has been a very long day today. I dropped my suitcase down the escalator and had to run down the escalator backwards trying to get it. So it's just been a bit of a gong show for me. So I'm a little tired right now, and I apologize so much. I will get my act together. Okay. So, Elaine, do you want to step on to the next slide, if that's okay? For sure, thank you. So, the application process. So, when it comes to the application process, there's several steps that have to be, we kind of have to go through before we make a licensing decision. The first being you have to submit your application through the CTLS, the Cannabis Tracking Licensing System. When you submit that application, we do require that you submit your site evidence package within 10 days. That's your video footage as well as photographs. In the case for micros, though, there's no video footage necessarily required other than just a simple tour of your overall physical security for your, not physical security, your physical barrier of your outside of your building and for your storage area. So it's very minimal of the information that you have to submit to us. Once you submit your application, it goes into the payment queue. We have an application fee, application screening fee, sorry, as well as a security clearance fee for applicable personnel. Once you do pay your payment, you move into the screening queue. In that particular case, we're actually assessing your application for completeness, legibility, as well as our ability to actually further process the application. So is there sufficient information present in the application for us to actually make a decision on the information contained within it? The service standard that we're working towards right now is a 30-day non-binding service standard. So that doesn't include us having to go back to ask for additional information at any particular point, but generally we are meeting our targets with 30-day screening time frames. I will say that we don't currently have a predictable time frame for when you submit your application all the way through to getting an actual licensing decision. We are setting ourselves up in a way that we hope we can provide some service standards in the near future so that people understand kind of roughly how long they can expect to wait from submitting their application to actually getting a licensing decision. But we're still in the process of trying to kind of nail down some details to be able to do that in a meaningful way. So once you go through screening, you go into the review queue and the security clearances. So even though it's kind of one line here, it actually kind of diverges into two different things. So you go into review queue, where you actually review all the application information that you submitted as we required in the application guide. And on the other side, it goes into security clearances. So we actually are kind of running the two processes at the same time. Right now, we're running towards a target of 60 business days from the day that you submit your site evidence package to us making a licensing decision. But I will say that the clock stops once we have to go back to you for information. So it's the time that we actually have it in our hands that we're looking at, but any case that we have to actually go and ask you additional information, which may happen through the application process, that for us, that clock of 60 days actually stops for that moment until we get the response back from you. And then once we actually get through the review and at the same time you have passed your security clearance requirements, we will make a licensing decision. And generally what happens is when you are receiving your licenses, we actually issue the security clearances at the same time. So, going to the next one. And now I highlight
just before I move on, I was just going to mention, you'll notice these beautiful red boxes around some of the process steps. The reason I put them there is because these are the three steps: the application submission, screening, and the review and security clearance are the three steps where the physical security requirements for you as an applicant are going to become most prevalent.
Excellent. Thank you for, I was about to say that, so thank you. And then the other thing, I feel like I'm a pusher of these things, but I will own that title 100%. So we have released some we have released a few guidance documents that's meant to help license holders or applicants, better understand the licensing process. There's three very important documents that I will forever refer people to. So number one being the actual application guide. In that guide, we actually go through the effort as best as we can as bureaucrats trying to explain in plain language what we're looking for in an application, and specifically not only what we're looking for information, but the manner in which we want you to actually submit it to us. Keep in mind, you live and breathe your grows and your processing facilities, but unfortunately we don't know them, and we're looking at it in a very 2D look. So for us, we need you to put it in a certain format so that when we look at all these papers, we can kind of put them together in a way that we actually understand them. So we're very prescriptive about what we're looking for information and how it's submitted to us. The other two documents outside of that is the physical security guides, measures guidance document, and that is basically, again, us trying to plain language what the actual physical security requirements are for the cannabis regulations in relation to these licenses. For micros, there is a section dedicated to the micro applicants in there that we kind of tease out a little bit about the good principles and practices you should consider when it comes to building out your facility for physical security. And then on top of that, we have the Good Production Practice Guidance document. And in that document as well, it's the same idea where we actually take part 5, I think, of the regulations, which is the Good Production Practices section, and we tease out a little bit more clearly some good principles and practices that you should live by when it comes to either building out your facility that you should consider when you're actually building your facility, as well as when you're actually running your facility, things you should consider when you're operating whatever you're doing in your facility. So. And we always encourage you guys to always use these documents in conjunction with the regulations of the Act. So, right?
So, this is me, yes. Back in May, we made some process changes, process improvements, and one of those was a requirement when you submit your application within 10 days, and this is, Jackie had mentioned this, within 10 days of submitting your application, you also have to submit your site evidence. This means that you have to have your site fully built out, fully functional when you apply for your license. And this applies to all cultivation licenses, all processing licenses, and also for medical purposes licenses. Our beautiful cannabis licensing application guide does include all the details of the format that you can use to submit this information to us. And when you have your fully built site, as it said there, it has to be operational and functional. This doesn't mean that everything has to be there. Obviously, your plants aren't going to be on site, but it's everything that's permanent on the site has to be there. So this is all your security features, it's all your GPP measures, all of your facility lighting, ventilation, air filtration systems, anything that's going to be there permanently. We want to be able to see that and then be able to assess that visually when you submit your site evidence. You don't have to have your cultivation and processing equipment in place. You don't have to have your tables in place, trimmer scales, that sort of thing. That we're not really looking at that. So you can wait to bring that in, but we want to make sure that everything, especially for the physical security, for the GDP, we can be able to see that when you submit your site evidence. Big thing to note here is this last bullet is that you can request only a portion of your license, a portion of the building to be licensed from the start within the identified site perimeter. So you don't have to have your site fully built out. You're only required to demonstrate compliance for that small portion of the area that you want, and then you can always space up after you've been licensed. We're going to go into that. We do have a slide with an example for that in a little bit. This is back to you, Jackie. This is a good news slide.
This slide is intended to kind of explain how we came to the decision. I know in May, it was, not everyone was happy with the decision that we took in regard to having a building built first, but I want to explain a little bit behind that. So this slide is meant to give you a bit of history of why we kind of arrived at the conclusion that we needed to make that overall change in our approach. So from June of 2013 to 2017, May 2017, we'd only issued 44 licenses. So on average, it was one license a month that we were issuing. In May of 2017, we actually decided to do some process improvements and included as well, in place of having an on-site inspection, we chose instead to have people submit video tours, similar to what we're doing now, to kind of overall shorten the overall review process for a license. And in that time, from May 2017 through to May 2019, we did actually issue 129 licenses, but it averaged out to about 5 licenses per month. So when we started doing the assessment of kind of what does that look like long term, we really had to sit down and say what makes the most sense. So there was a lot of people in queue who we were doing the paper reviews with, and we were happy to do the paper reviews with, but what was happening is there was people who already had built facilities that were kind of at the back of the line, that were going to be there almost possibly up to 2 to 3 more years before we could actually get through them, when we actually looked at like our overall assessment of how quickly we could process these applications. And so in that moment, we decided to take this new approach. And I have to say, I'm actually quite proud of that decision, because since then, in just that very short period of time, since May 2019 until basically as recently as this past January, we've already issued 123 licenses since just this May. And our average right now is about 14 licenses per month.
Can I ask you a question?
So that on its own is huge. I think that's actually going to help the industry a lot more, instead of having people just kind of sitting there in the bubble. Sorry.
We just have a question from the audience pertinent to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you basically saying that those building requirements that you put in May of last year were administrative as opposed to regulatory requirements? Can you please confirm that?
Whether the change was made from an administrative perspective rather than a regulatory perspective.
I think you're on mute again, Jackie.
Technology. Okay, so sorry about that. So there was never anything in the regulations that ever required us to do a paper review. The reason it kind of came out about that way is that when we initially started the program back in 2013 and 2014, we had such a young industry that people who were not used to being regulated, which was fine, that was there was an existing market before we came along. We acknowledge that weren't used to being regulated, and so what we ended up doing is we ended up having to kind of help people by holding their hands to kind of get to a license. But in doing that, it ended up being that everyone kind of took on this approach that they needed to submit in a paper application and then come in with the building later. And we kind of kept that going because the industry was so young that we really felt that we needed to do that, because if we didn't do that, people just wouldn't come in overall. And we appreciated also that there's a huge startup cost with it. So when the industry was still really young, we didn't feel that it was appropriate to kind of say, go ahead and put all that money in and we'll see if you get a license later. It was quite a lot of an ask. But in this past year, with legalization happening and having a much larger number of license holders, we felt that the industry had developed enough that we could take on this responsibility of changing our overall approach so that those people who were ready to start actually producing right away would be able to get a license right away. And those people who needed a little bit more time could take a little bit more time, but we weren't necessarily holding up other people from progressing with their licenses. Is there a follow-up question, or are we just all?
It's a huge barrier for micros.
Just a comment that it is a really big barrier for micros because of access to financing and some of the unknowns around security clearances.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've heard that on a few occasions, multiple occasions actually, from a lot of micro applicants. When we did the roadshow back in May, that was one of the big things that we heard, was especially for security clearances. I know that's something that causes people quite a bit of actual angst about it. So we are still currently in the process of examining if there's some way that we can figure out that the security clearance kind of happens earlier on, so that maybe you don't have to bear the burden of putting all that money out and not necessarily knowing whether or not you're going to get your security clearance. So we're still in the process of trying to examine how we do that. When it comes to the actual, the building itself, we kind of looked at all the other regulated industries that exist that Health Canada is responsible for. So pharmaceutical companies, as well as just any other business like pesticide industry and other industries, acknowledging that they are a lot more established than the cannabis industry in regard to regulated industries. The cannabis industry existed before we came along, I want to acknowledge that. But when it came to being a regulated industry, it was still relatively new. We felt that we didn't feel comfortable issuing a license without having a building built. And if we were to continue on the path that we were on, basically we wouldn't have issued many licenses at all in the coming years, and people would be even more frustrated and waiting even longer than 4 years that they had already waited for their licenses. So for us, we felt that this was the right decision to make. We acknowledge that not everyone liked it, but in the end, based on just the fact that we've been able to get out so many more licensing decisions in such a short period of time, and also the industry is a lot more established, so that unknown of what should I be doing for my application, what do I need to do, what shouldn't I do, we've tried to kind of debunk that by putting out documents that are going to support people in kind of understanding that a little bit better. So if it's okay, I'd like to move on, because I know Elaine has so much more that we want to actually talk to you guys about for physical security, so I don't want to steal too much airspace, because I can talk on this topic for days.
There was one little thing I wanted to mention just about the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner there. You'll see that it is specific to micro applicants and licenses, and the licenses number is actually 31 now, just because we did license one additional micro cultivation today, and with the understanding that yes, there are the financing and the security clearance issues can be a barrier, especially when you have to have your site all built out. But there have been at least, over the last 2 months, at least 10 additional micro licenses. So it is ramping up somewhat for the micro licensing process. But now, this is why we're here, the meat and potatoes of our presentation. So your physical security requirements, you're going to find those in Part 4 of the cannabis regulations. So these are the requirements that you have to secure your site where you're doing your licensed activities. So all licensed classes, whether it's cultivation or processing or sale for medical purposes, micro standards, they all have a requirement for physical security measures, but they do vary depending on the activities that you're doing and the subclass of license that you want to get. So the purpose behind them, though, is to make sure that we are reducing the risk of diversion and that we're protecting the public safety. So that's why they vary between what you're doing, because obviously it depends on your activities and the amount of cannabis that you have on your site as to what perceived risk your site might be under, and then the requirement for the physical security on top of that. So, and this is what Jackie had mentioned, I think it was around our slide 3, is it's that ability to demonstrate. So this is where an applicant has to demonstrate to us that their site is secure in accordance with those requirements under Part 4 of the regulations. So this is demonstrate as an applicant in your application and in your site evidence package. And then after your license, it's also demonstrating upon inspection that you can continue to comply with whatever you have in place. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, saying going back to your cannabis licensing application guide. This is where section, and we've got bold there, section 6.8 of the application guide. This is where it goes into all the requirements for the physical security measures, whether that's standard or micro. So, and then you're going to look at table 11 and table 12 in your app guide too, and they go into a lot more detail about what's required for your physical security requirements. And you're, just to make a clear note here that all classes of license are required to have an organizational security plan. An organizational security plan is essentially, it's kind of a base, a support for your physical security that's on site. So it goes to training and your business organizational structure and your SOPs for how you're going to conduct your security on your site. And you have to have all that information. And every type of license is required to have that. The actual physical security measures in place, the only one that kind of gets a free pass on this is your sale for medical purposes without possession. So this would be like a registration office that's registering medical clients but never has any cannabis on site. And because there's never any cannabis on site, that's why we've said, okay, you do not have to have the physical security requirements as required under Part 4. So it's only if you're ever going to have the cannabis on site that you need to have these requirements. In our beautiful little table here, you'll see that there's a bit of a split between the requirements for your standard size and your sale for medical purposes, and then there's different requirements for provisions in the regulations for your micro cultivation, micro processing, and nursery. And then you've got your splits by your row, so there's requirements for site design, for perimeter, storage area, operations area, and then retention of recorded materials. The way we're going to go through this is we're going to split it up. We're going to go through site design, perimeter, storage area, operations area, and I'm going to go through your standard, your sale for medical purposes, and Jackie's going to take you through your micro. For site design, this is the only one that has it's the same wording for both your standard or your micros. So whether you're standard or your micro, your site has to be designed in a manner that prevents unauthorized access. So this means that you've got your site, which is all your areas within your defined perimeter, and it's got to be looked at in a holistic way. So every part of your physical security measures, whether that's your intrusion detection, your access control, your visual monitoring, all of those bits work together to prevent unauthorized access to your site. We're also looking at our rings of protection concept. This means the site's designed in such a way so that if there's an intruder, if they're detected, essentially if they're going to get past one barrier, there's going to be other barriers in place that will provide you time for the authorities to arrive on your site, so there's not actually any, so there's no diversion that's going to happen, and there's no risk to public health and safety that's going to happen because you've had those multiple rates in place that prevent anyone from getting access to your cannabis. So I'm going to take you to the requirements for the site perimeter for standard. This is your cultivation processing and for your sale for medical purposes. The proposed perimeter of the site has to be clearly defined. This can be a fence line, it could be exterior building and walls, it could be some other means. However, the big thing is it has to be clearly indicated on your site plans when you submit them. This is a big thing that we do notice is there isn't an identified site perimeter when we're looking at the submitted information. So whether it might be clear to you, but it's not always clear to us because, like Jackie says, we are doing something of a 2D review. So where you're living and breathing it, it might be obvious to you. It has to be obvious to us what your site perimeter is so that we can then properly do the assessment. For your site perimeter, if you're standard, you have to have visual monitoring. The two important parts of visual monitoring are at the all times and under all conditions in which they're used. So at the all times, this means you're 24/7. You've got to monitor your site all the time. So if there's anything that's going to potentially make a break in the monitoring, such as a power outage, you have to have something in place that's going to prevent that. Whether that be a generator, some other backup system for your power to make sure that there's no cut in the monitoring. And then also under all conditions in which they're used. So this is nighttime, daytime, particularly when you're talking about perimeter, it's usually outside. So if it's outside, you live in Canada, yes, cool. Can your visual monitoring, can your devices, can they function in the cold? Can they function in when it's wet? If it's foggy, you want to be able to see everything at all times. And it's also important that the whole perimeter is covered. So this is where we're going to look at the locations and the positioning of your cameras. Also the number of cameras that you have in place. So when you submit your information, what we're going to be looking at is your site plan to see where all the cameras are, how they're positioned. Then we're also going to be looking at the brand, the make, the model of those cameras to look at their specifications to see if they can do what you say they're going to do. We also then are looking at your site evidence package and looking at the camera footage from all of the cameras. So we want to be able to see the views from all the cameras and to make sure that if you do a walk around of your perimeter, whether that's the fence line, whether that's your building, there are no blind spots and no blocked views. And you want to be careful too when you're doing your video that you're doing it in such a condition as it wouldn't be if there's going to be a major change on your site, say, okay, well, it would normally be blocked, but we've done it in such a way you can't see it being blocked this time. It should be how your site normally is to make sure we can see, okay, this is how your site's going to look. You've done your walk around, you can see that there are no blind spots, and your visual recording devices are going to function day and night and in all conditions and at all times. Intrusion detection system. So this again, you're looking at operating at all times. So this is, I'm going to sound like a broken record here again, but it's making sure that your intrusion detection is functioning 24/7. So you're going to have your backup, you're going to have your generator in place, or you're going to have some other backup system of power in place so that you can make sure if there is a cut to the power, your intrusion detection system is going to continue to work. You also want to have your site plan on there. You have to tell us where all of your intrusion detection devices are, what type they are, how they function. We want to look at, again, make sure there are no blind spots, no block views. We want to look at the brand, the make, and the model. And we've got a list of examples here. This is not an exhaustive list. But there's lots of different things that can make a full intrusion detection system. And that's why we use the word system, because there's no one particular way of doing it, no one right way of doing it. It's not prescriptive. It really depends on your site, the size of your site, the conditions at your site, as to what type of intrusion detection system that you're going to be putting in place. And it's up to you to come to us to demonstrate, again, why having these particular devices on site is going to work for your site, and you're going to be able to demonstrate that it operates at all times. You also want to make sure, I'm going to move on to the next one. There we go, that it's monitored at all times. So this goes to the same thing. So again, that's at all times, so it has to be 24/7. It can be, it doesn't have to be you on site who's doing the monitoring. You can have a third-party alarm monitoring company. You can have on-site security. You can have a combination of that. And you can do something like push notifications. So if you have an occurrence and you need to make sure personnel are notified. You also want to put a procedure in place for when alarm does happen. This is to make sure that the appropriate personnel are notified, how the alarm is going to be investigated, what you're going to do to escalate, making sure the event is recorded. We love things to be recorded. The documentation is all about the documentation. If you can explain how something happened, when something happened, who was there, that's going to make our inspectors super happy. It's going to make our reviewers super happy when they're looking at your application to be able to say, okay, they can tick off all these boxes. Also, if something does happen, what you can do in the future to make sure it doesn't happen again, or it happens to a lesser extent if it's going to happen again. So corrective preventative actions in the future. You also want to make sure that you have a procedure in place for having your records and detected occurrences. So this is putting an SOP in place, putting templates in place, and making sure they're filled out. People who are working on your site are trained on how to use these, trained on who to speak to, so that they know if something happens, how you can make a record of that. Very important for the intrusion detection system is making sure that if what you put in place, you're putting something in place isn't going to trigger a lot of false alarms. So if you're putting, for example, if you're using all motion sensors, making sure the types of motion sensors you have aren't going to trigger a lot of false alarms, because you don't want to have a lot of occurrences that are false occurrences. Yeah.
Okay, so that was all for just standard. So let's just talk about micros now. So whether you're cultivating, processing, or a nursery application, the only requirement that applies to you for this is that you have to have the site surrounded by a physical barrier and have to prevent unauthorized access. So what we'd like to highlight that we're not prescriptive about what that physical barrier has to be made of. So if you choose to have a fence, you may have a fence. But if you just want to use the envelope of your building, that would be sufficient for us. The one thing that we're looking for is that the physical barrier itself is continuous and should surround the entire site, and whatever that definition of a site for yourself is, because you guys define through your application what you've decided is your site, so you have to have a physical barrier that completely encompasses that space. When you have your site plan, we would encourage you to clearly identify what you are defining as your site perimeter, and make sure that it's clear whether or not it is, or what is that particular material. So for example, that fence or those walls of the building. It's something that is a simple ask that we have, but people often do not include it in their application and result in a delay in us processing their application, or worse, something where they've missed a few of these things that result in us sending an intent to refuse. So where possible, I really encourage you to look at the application guide to see exactly what we're looking for, and almost use it as like a checklist to say, did I do this? Did I include this? And if you have all the checks on those documents, then you should be in a good place when you submit the application, and hopefully prevent yourself from having as many delays from us going back to you to ask for additional information.
So going back to our requirements for your standards, back to the stringent ones, we're going to look at the requirements for storage area. This is where we get a number of questions. It's not necessarily written in the clearest way, and we really try to make it a bit more clear in our licensing application guide, and especially in the physical security guide, to explain what we mean when we say each storage area must be located within an area that meets the following. So this kind of goes a little bit to your rings of protection that we're looking for. Your storage area we're seeing that as kind of one of your higher risk areas, because this is where you're storing your cannabis and where you're going to have your higher value cannabis there, because usually you're storing your finished product, and your finished product obviously have higher value than the plants or your seeds, and or your bulk product. But your bulk product would also be in your storage area. But I do that. So the storage area, and if you look at I'm going to use my mouse here, this is a little diagram. It's super, super simple, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of a visual of, if this is your storage area, then you have to have something that, and it doesn't have to surround it, but it has to have an area outside of it that you can access into the storage area from, and this area outside of it has to meet all of these requirements. So that's what the Section 67 requirement, the area within an area, means that you have to meet all of these requirements. These requirements being that the area outside your storage area has to have restricted access, so only individuals who are required to be in that area for their duties. It has to have a physical barrier, same definition as Jackie just gave you for a physical barrier for a perimeter. It's preventing something physical that prevents unauthorized access, has to surround it. Visual monitoring has to be in place, again monitored at all times by visual recording devices. The visual recording devices have to be capable of making recording in the conditions that they're used, so daytime, nighttime, any sort of temperature. There is an intrusion detection system in that I don't really want to call it a surrounding area, but in that outside area, outside your storage area. Again, it operates at all times, and a response for the intrusion detection system. So it's monitored at all times, there are appropriate measures taken, and the detected occurrences are documented and retained. So that's, again, your storage area has to have all those things, but also the area that you're using to access into your storage area also has to have all those things. Are there any questions about that? Because that can be a little bit confusing.
Can you give us an example, Paul?
Could you give us an example of something that you've seen that passes muster in this regulation?
So, I mean, if you've got your storage area inside, for example, an operations area, that would work. So you're going to, or if you have another, like a room that you have to access and then get into your storage area from that. So say your storage area only has one access point. In order to get into that access point, you have to go into the room. So the room is, say it's made of concrete, has concrete walls. There's your physical barrier with a door that, say it's a fireproof door. So you could go through that and making sure the door has some sort of restricted access on it, whether that be like a keypad or a card lock. And it's restricted to only those individuals who have to be in there. So they would have a keypad, like a code or a card, or a combination of those things to get in. The area, the room that you're going into, it has to have some sort of visual monitoring. So there can't be any areas within that area that you can't see what you're doing. So, for example, a couple of cameras on either side of that, say the square room that you're going into, a couple of cameras on either side of that. Again, making sure those cameras can function in all conditions that they're going to be in. Doesn't mean that the camera has to have, for example, if there's, it doesn't have to have night vision capabilities if the lights are on all the time in that room. If the lights are on all the time, fine, great. But if the lights are going to go off, does it have night vision capabilities? Those sorts of things. The intrusion detection system, this is something like door strikes on the door to get into it, motion sensors in the room if you're going into the room. So, and that would be the room that goes then into the storage area. Then the storage area itself has requirements.
Could you,
Is that somewhat helpful?
yeah, could you also give us an example of wall materials that aren't concrete that might be suitable?
Just simple gyprock, like any normal, like any kind of construction, like my building here has gyprock in it. That would be fine, like walls, regular wall studs, whether it's wood or metal. We're not prescriptive of what that physical barrier actually has to be. So, yeah, just any regular wall that you would have in any normal building that you build would be sufficient enough. And even when it comes to the actual storage area, we're not prescriptive about what the storage area walls need to be made of either. You could use just regular gyprock with wood or metal studs behind it. It's meant to be something that stops you from easily getting access. So I'm not just going to be able to just kind of walk in. I actually have to do something like break through a wall to get to it. But we're not at the standard where we were back in the day where we required you to have an actual vault. Regular, just run-of-the-mill walls that you'd have in any stereotypical building would be acceptable to us.
Okay, just give us a second. We have another question.
I was consulted that we needed steel meshing under the drywall.
So one of the micro producers here was instructed that they needed steel mesh under the drywall. Is that correct?
No.
Who instructed them of that?
CCI.
One of the consultants, CCI.
No, we do not look for that in our reviews at all in regards to, we do ask you what you use as construction material, for example, but we don't prescribe to you what that is. So something like I described, like metal or wood studs, and I hope studs the right word for my partner is in construction, so if I'm failing him right now, I feel really guilty, but the regular run-of-the-mill construction that you would have in any building with just regular gyprock would be fine. The only consideration I would suggest outside of that is that you'd want to paint the gyprock. Just for GBV concerns, it's generally not good to have untreated, so just regular run-of-the-mill paint on a wall would be sufficient. It doesn't even have to be antimicrobial. If you have high humidity in the room, you may want to consider antimicrobial, but if it's just a room that's going to be used to access the storage room, again, this only applies for standards. This does not apply for micro applicants. Micro applicants, you just have the storage room and it just has to be a physical barrier, and something as simple as a run-of-the-mill wall that you find in any building, any industrial park building, or any just building in general, just like my building right here, that would be sufficient.
Okay, we good? Yeah. Okay, we're good on this end.
Okay, excellent. And I would encourage you to go back to your physical security measures guide for cannabis, and like read it super thoroughly, like take it to bed with you, cuddle it, and just like learn to love it, because it does have so many like best practices and principles in there that are really helpful. And I was looking for it while Jackie was talking. I can't find it right now, but there is a really good kind of definition in there of what a physical barrier actually means. So it's not like examples of the type of construction, but it's a physical barrier. It's kind of preventing and limiting the ability or the access through that barrier. So it's not saying you cannot get through this, it's slowing down someone from getting through it. So, the requirements for storage, so that's in section 67, that's particular to storage areas. All the other requirements for the storage area also go to requirements for mostly, also goes to requirements for operations areas. Operations areas are anywhere you're doing, it's a grow area, and it's also anywhere you're doing any cannabis processing, so drying or trimming, anything like that, those are going to be your operations area. So there's a number of requirements for those. And again, this is particular to standards, so I want you to keep that in your head, and everything I just described for the requirements for the storage area around that, that's also for standards, so just keep that in your mind. So there has to be restricted access to your storage area, to your operations area. This is for all access points. So if you have, say, a grow room, and it has 3 different doors on it, all of those doors have to have a restricted access at those points. Whether that access control or some sort of restriction devices. So you've got lock and key, or you've got door strikes or keypads, card readers, anything like that, or a combination. Those things are your restricted access, and making sure only those individuals who need to get into that area for their duty have access to those particular access controls. You also have to have a record of exit and entry. This doesn't have to be done electronically. It doesn't have to be, with the card reader and then you get your printout or whatever. It can be a lot more helpful, especially if there's a lot of in and out of that room. But it can be a manual sign-in or logging in, but it has to be on both sides of the door. So when somebody comes in, they have to log in. When somebody leaves, they have to log out. Whether that's done electronically or manually. Those things that we're looking for on it are the date and time of the entry and exit, who particularly, so it's an identity of the individual, so that it's easy for them to, for you as a company, to know who that individual is, and us as the regulator to know who that is. The name of the area that you're going in, this name of the area, we're really hoping that it would match up with how you have submitted it to us in the application. Again, makes it easier, but we want to make sure it's very clear. Okay, it was John Smith at 6:15 on February 7th, went into storage area 1. And it's also the identifier of the access point. So say storage area 1 has 3 doors. We want to make sure that we know that John Smith went in at 6:15 and he went in through door 1. And then, hey, you know what? Here he goes again. He's going out. We have to make sure there's a difference between in and out. And at 6:27, he left. If there's any sort of missing logs, if it's seen that you're getting your log in, but there's not a log out, those are the sorts of things that we're going to be looking at upon inspection. Again, each of these areas has to be, and that's only for your storage area, sorry, just so you guys know. So that's why I'm saying storage area is an example there, but that's only for your storage area. For physical barriers, so it has to entirely surround each area. And here it is here, this is what I was talking about. It's the type of construction delays entry of intruder, hinders someone from gaining access. So that's what it is. It's not saying we absolutely can't get through it. It's going to delay somebody from getting through it. It's going to cause them a problem if they want to get through that physical barrier. So we want to consider the construction and materials for not just your walls, but also your doors, any windows that you might have in place, any fences that you're using as a physical barrier. So, say you're using you have a storage area that's got a physical barrier that's a chain link. How big is that chain link? Is somebody going to be able to reach through that? Are there any vent openings too? Because there is a requirement for ventilation for your storage area, and so if there's any large vent openings, is somebody going to be able to easily tunnel through that? Or is there something that's in place to prevent people from getting through there? Just an important note here that outdoor grow areas, they are considered operations areas, and they do have to be surrounded by physical barriers. You do have to have visual monitoring in your storage and your operations areas. You're going to look at that at all times and under all conditions. This is the same definition as I gave when I was speaking about the perimeter of the site. You can't have any power breaks. You can't have nighttime, daytime. If it's nighttime, you can't not see it. You can keep your lights on. That's totally fine too. But for example, if you're in an area that has high humidity, is the camera going to get fogged up? How are you going to prevent it from getting fogged up? There's an exception here, your grow area. You do not have to have cameras within the room. So you only have to have a camera to monitor entry and exit points. So an example here is, for example, if you have a hallway and say you have 3 grow rooms in a row, and you have one camera that can see the entry-exit point to all three of those, that one camera could suffice. I'm not definitely going to suffice, but it could suffice to, as long as you're going to be able to detect any illicit conduct and to be able to make that visible reporting of entry and exit to that grow area. Each area does also have to have an intrusion detection system. Again, very similar to what I described for the perimeter of the site, making sure each area has to be secured by a system. Again, operating at all times. You're going to want to make sure that you have your intrusion detection system is partitioned so that if any part goes down, the other parts don't also go down. So when you're going through those areas, you want to make sure that they are operating at all times. And it's looking for not just the attempted or actual unauthorized access, and not just the movement in the area, but also any tampering with the system. So that's something that's really particular to make sure that your system is able to do. Again, the exception here is for the grow areas. So your grow areas have a kind of a lower threshold for what's required, both in consideration of the visual monitoring and the intrusion detection system. So there is an intrusion detection system in place for grow areas, but it doesn't have to detect unauthorized movement. So, for example, you don't have to have motion detectors inside a grow area. This is because there is a lot of movement in a grow area. You've got potential fans, and also, again, your grow areas are usually going to have not as much concern as potentially a processing area. The intrusion detection systems have to be monitored at all times, similar to the intrusion detection system for the perimeter. So like I said, it doesn't have to be on site. It can be a third-party monitoring. It can be a combination, as long as you kind of have that 24/7 monitoring. And then also, again, it's taking the appropriate measures, making sure that if there is any actual or attempted unauthorized access, if there is a tampering of the system, how are you reporting that? How are you ensuring that it's not going to happen again? How are you contacting the authorities? Essentially making sure that you're doing what you can to reduce your risk of anything happening to your cannabis. Back to you, Jackie.
Okay, so again, I just want to highlight that was all in relation to standards. So when it comes to a microcultivator, processor, and nursery, outside of having a physical barrier for your perimeter of your site, you also have to have a physical barrier that surrounds your storage area. So the definition again that Elaine was referring to here is that it has to entirely surround each of the areas, and construction actually delays the intruder from getting in, but it's not Fort Knox. Like, you don't need this high-tech anything. Something as simple as like the wall in my office would be sufficient as a physical barrier that you have for your storage area. Outside of that, you also have to have restricted access to the storage area itself. So any entry point to that storage area, you actually have to restrict it to the person who's required it for their duties. Something as simple as a locking key on the door that goes into the storage area would be sufficient. And knowing who you gave the key to should have access to that space would be sufficient. So one way that you demonstrate to that is you write down who has access to the keys. And it's, for example, if you've got 3 staff, and all 3 of you have access to the storage room, that would be okay. But you have to identify that it's because they would need access to that storage area. Outside of that, we don't really have any other requirements for physical security for a microclass or a nursery class license. So in those cases where someone may already have a grow, what we described to you in regards to physical security may already be in place. My assumption is you probably have a building and you probably already have doors, and you probably have a room in that building that you could use as a storage area that already has a door and that already has a lock, or you just have to install a lock on. It doesn't have to be really complicated. Outside of that, though, you definitely have to think about GPPs, but like I said, we generally appreciate that people put paint on their drywall, just because it's just not easy cleanable surface because it has paper on it. So painting it so that you can just wipe the surfaces and you can clean them on a regular basis is something that we do encourage. But when it comes to physical security, it's a relatively low requirement that we have in place for anyone who's looking to become a microcultivator, processor, or a nursery license holder.
So kind of the final requirement for, and this applies only to standards. There isn't, if you look back at the kind of, I think it was the second table in this presentation that listed the different provisions that apply to standards, sale for medical purposes, and micros. You would have seen for this, the last row for retention, there's a requirement for this for standard and for sale for medical purposes, but not for micros. This is because you're not going to have your visual recordings and you're not going to have an intrusion detection system, so you have no requirement to retain these recordings. So, but if you are standard, you do have to have your visual recordings. They have to be retained for at least 1 year after the day on which it's made. Any record of detected occurrences, those have to be kept for 2 days after the day on which it was prepared. 2 years, sorry, I just said 2 days. No, ignore that. 2 years. 2 years. I was just trying to see if you guys were still listening. And then the storage area access logs. So again, those are 2 years after the day on which the information is recorded. So those are really important things. Like I say, we love written recording. We love to make sure that you have kept all of your documentation and to know that you have all your recordings in place for the required period of time. So we can ensure that you do get a strong compliance history. That's what we're looking for too. You want to be a high quality license holder. And part of that is retaining your visual recordings. So like I say, this doesn't go to micros, and there really are only those 4 requirements for the micros.
Sorry, my cleaning lady in our building just came in. Sorry about that. Okay, Elaine, do you want to go to the next slide then?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so physical security evidence. So unfortunately, the cannabis tracking licensing system doesn't enable us to upload large chunks of data into it. It's just, we don't have that capacity in the system. So we actually have you submit it through another means. Generally, we have people do it through USB. We are very prescriptive about how we want you to submit that information. I would 100% encourage you to look at, in particular, this is for in particular, what we're showing here is what we require for a micro applicant for information that you need to submit to us. But if you're a standard applicant, we'd encourage you to look at table 12. But these are kind of the details, and what I really want to highlight is if I don't know your site at all, right? But I want to understand your site. Ways that you can help me do that is making sure that when you identify things, you're very clear about what they are. So things like, what is your site perimeter? You could take a highlighter on a piece of paper. We don't need it to be drawn up by some architect. Literally, it doesn't have to be to scale. We just want to understand what is the layout of your site and what you define for yourself as your perimeter. So just taking a highlighter and kind of drawing around that square, whatever shape your building is, or whatever fence shape you have, and identifying that this colored pink highlighter, that's what my perimeter is. Things like the footprint of your building, making sure that it's very obvious. We'd really like to know that when you submit this information, it's submitted in a certain way so that we can really understand it. So if you, on your site plan, refer to a building as Building A, any other document that you make reference to should refer to Building A. If you have to submit, in the case of our standard applicant, you submit video evidence and you're giving us a walking tour and you're saying, oh, this is grow room 2, every other thing that you make reference to for that room should have grow room 2. It's really important for us to understand. Elaine spoke to it earlier about, for example, in the case again where you're standard and you have to have visual surveillance or you have to have intrusion detection, like having it named in a way that we can make sure that when you're talking about this intrusion detection device, it's that one that you're talking about. So any other time that you refer to it, we understand it. So we tried in this last iteration of the application guide as much as possible to be really prescriptive. We actually wrote the reviewer guidance document. So the tool that the reviewers actually use to review your application, we wrote that first. And then what we did is we said, okay, these are all the things we want to assess for. What does that mean the public has to give us? And in what format do we want them to give it to us in? And that's where we actually wrote this application guide from. So what we're asking you for and the manner in which we're asking you for is how the reviewer is actually doing the assessment against your information. So we're really trying to be transparent. I know in the past we haven't always been super transparent about what we're looking for information, but this is our first kick at the can. And to be clear, we know we need to improve because it's still not hitting the mark at all times, but at least we're trying to be a little bit more forward with you guys so that you understand what we need for information to be able to make the determination whether or not we should or should not issue a license. And to be clear, very few people have been refused their license. More often than not, people do come in. It just takes a little longer because we have to go back and forth because they didn't necessarily follow what information we require for them to actually put in their application.
And just to go or jump off of that too is a lot of the time it's your site actually has what it needs, but it's making sure that that information is conveyed in your application. So it's not just having the what, but also the how. So that's where we use that word demonstrate again and again. So it's demonstrating what you have and how it needs. And that's what we're really looking for. And that's where our reviewers are able to then go through their guidance and their checklist and be able to say, okay, I'm looking for this. You said you have this, and it does this because. And so we can say, okay, we got A, B, and C, and that closes the loop.
So we'll go to the next slide. So that's kind of it of us talking at you guys. I'm sure you guys have many questions, and we're going to try and answer them for you. But for your reference, we included them here because I think Paul has a copy of the deck. Paul, I actually asked it not to send it this deck. I realize there's some errors that we need to actually fix in it before we send it out, but we will send it out once we fix one of the intrusion detection made reference to like visual monitoring, and I was like, oh, that's wrong. So we'll fix that before we get to you guys. It's okay. But anyway, we will provide you a copy of this. In there we have any questions that you have in regards to licensing. We encourage you to email that first email address there. They're the best people to email in regards to any of your questions that you may have. Even if you're an application, and you want to know kind of whatever's going on with your application, you can also email us there at that one. We also included the application guide, the link to where you can find it. And because this presentation is meant to physical security, we purposely added the physical security guidance document that we created back in May as a reference for you guys. Again, you know, when you're thinking about what do these crazy Health Canada ladies tell me on this Friday night, one night, you can actually go to some of these documents and look it up yourself, so it's readily available for you. So without further ado, we'll open it up to you guys for questions.
Okay, thank you. So we collected some questions just before your presentation, and I'll kind of go through the ones that we didn't hit on during the presentation, maybe to the satisfaction of the audience. And then once we've gone through those, then we can bring people up and they can ask those questions that are still remaining. So one question came up about the consequences of infractions. So say someone neglects to sign in or out of that storage room and you come and do an audit, what happens?
That's a great question. So do you mind putting yourselves on mute? So we're going to have to do this in a coordinated way. For that, generally what may happen is an inspector may see it, they may not see it. If they do see it, they generally will put an observation, but honestly, you missing it once will generally not result in you getting an observation. Normally what I would do, and to be clear, I was an inspector for 7 or 8 years in the Controlled Substances Program, and I've done inspections under the MMAR, and MMPR, ACMPR, and the Cannabis Act and regulations. I personally would always use the guide that I would look at as more of a systemic issue. So if I saw an error once, say, okay, kind of keep on looking through, and I'd even look a little bit more than I normally would, because if I saw it once, maybe it's probably happened a couple times. And generally what happens in that case is they'll make an observation. They generally rate the observation, so it's major, minor, and critical. Critical is not so great. If you get a critical observation, you're probably having some kind of major compliance and enforcement action happening in that particular case. More often than not, though, when it comes to something like people not logging themselves in or out, it will probably be somewhere around a minor. If it's really bad, you might get a major observation. What that means, all it means at the end of the day, though, either way, when you get those observations, is that you have to then identify how you're going to correct that going forward. So if that does happen at your site, you've gotten an observation, and someone, one of your staff, for example, is just really horrible at it. I used to do inspections, and there was this one guy in this one company. I feel like it was his personal vendetta against the logging in and out system. He just didn't do it. He'd always sneak in with someone, or sneak out with someone, or he'd go in, but he'd never come out in the records. And so what they ended up having to do is just write back to us and explaining they're going to retrain that person because he was the offender on a regular basis. So you're always given an opportunity to respond to any observation. Basically what we're looking for you to do is identify, yep, okay, it's a problem. We identify what the cause is, and we're going to try and address it this way, and coming up with kind of like an action plan of how you're going to address it. Sometimes it's as simple as, we're going to retrain someone. Sometimes it's actually the system itself that maybe isn't working the way it is, so you may have to update your system in another way. It really depends on the circumstances going on, but normally what happens with an observation in any case, unless it's critical, is that you get an inspection report and you're given an opportunity to respond to that, and you have to come up with corrective action plans and actually implement them.
Okay, next question in regards to transportation, and I don't know whether that was in terms of loading.
You're still on mute.
There we go, sorry. So the next question is regards to transportation and security, physical security around that. Is there any requirement there?
I'm going to ask you to put yourself on mute. So no, we don't. The onus is on the license holder to ensure the safety of any product during its transport, but we are not prescriptive about what that is. So cannabis currently right now, and even before the legalization, was being shipped through the mail. We did have tracking involved in it. We're not prescriptive anymore about any of that. The onus is on your company yourselves. I know back in the day, some people had armored trucks. It really depends on your comfort level of whatever's going on. It's at your discretion to decide what that's going to be in regards to your security. So whether or not you just have a trucking company that you have an agreement with, and that would be sufficient. But we're not prescriptive on it, and frankly, I think it's better that we're not, because I think it just makes your lives a lot more difficult if we get into that level of detail. But I'm assuming that you're going to care about your product, so you're going to put some level of effort in making sure that whatever mechanism that you use for transport would ensure its security, but we're not going to be prescriptive about what that is specifically, unless there is a reoccurring problem. We may ask you to looking into that a little bit more. That again goes back to that hospital inspection. They see a consistent case where you're losing products through transport. We may put in an observation that you need to do something about it and come up with a corrective action plan. But no, we're not prescriptive on that particular point.
Okay, thank you. Next question is around monitoring and validation of security systems and video monitoring equipment. Oh, hold on, just going to rephrase it.
So I want to know if there's specific testing of effectiveness and reassessment requirements of the system, or is it required?
Okay, I'm just going to let her ask.
Okay.
Are there specific requirements around testing the effectiveness of the security system and the assessment of the system, or is it required?
No, we don't prescribe to you guys to do that. Again, I go back to my inspector experience. I didn't love it when companies just relied on their staff messing up with their security system to test that it worked. So if someone walks into the place and they forget to turn the alarm off during that time, that's not a good test. I would encourage you, it's not a requirement, to, there is value in having it, there is a regulatory requirement for it, is even yourselves testing your system once a year is a good practice, just overall. I'm sure you value the property that you own and the things found in your buildings or in your spaces that you're going to have. So making sure that it's functional is good. Beyond that, the inspectors may verify it, but they may not verify it every time they're on site. They may look at your records tied to that. So if you have a couple of incidences where something's happened, they may look into that and understand a little bit better about what your reaction was. If you did something to actually address the issue, it's even better because you're even less likely to get an observation in that case. And an observation isn't the end of the world. It's just an opportunity for you guys to see maybe there's a little area of improvement, and that you can actually look at making yourself a little bit more compliant with the regulations. That's how I always saw observations. I wasn't there to slap you on the wrist. I was actually there to try and help you guys be more compliant with the regulations, so we had even more assurances that you're kind of operating within the framework of the regulation.
Okay.
And if I can add on to that just really quickly too, is when you're applying to and when you're putting together your site evidence package, we are looking for you to make sure that your cameras are working and your intrusion detection is working too. So when you do your walkthrough, we're going to be looking for, oh, hey, here now and this is for standard, obviously, but hey, I'm going into storage area, whatever, and I swiped my card, and now I'm putting in my key code, and that's going to log me into my storage area, and I can only get in because I'm allowed to be in here. So we can see that, hey, yes, you've got this, and it's working. And the same thing with submitting your still shots from your cameras. So it's like, okay, this is show that you put the cameras in place and they do what they're supposed to do.
How would you test for glass break monitoring in that situation?
I have gone in what I would call not super technical ways. I've smashed metal on metal together, and it will generally set off those. I think the inspectors may even have, there's a machine, like a little sensor you can actually set them off with. But yeah, if you hit metal on metal pretty hard, it generally will actually set them off. There is another option too. If you don't want to test it yourself, I do acknowledge that there may be a fee tied to it. The company that offers the monitoring services for you or install the intrusion detection systems will often, if you ask them to, with a cost associated to it, come in and test the alerts for you. But again, there is no requirement that it happens on an annual basis, but the challenge you're going to have is if we do have an inspector come up and you didn't realize that a portion of your security devices aren't working for you, you will have observations and you will have to correct them. But it's also not in your best interest just for public safety overall for us that someone could now get easier access to your space and your cannabis.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Paul. So an air nailer.
It's very not technical, just metal on metal. You really are.
Someone say an air nailer works very well too.
Oh, there you go. Hey, thanks. That's a good tip. I'll let you know.
When you have a continuous time, date, stamp, video surveillance system, would that be sufficient for login and log out?
No, unfortunately it's not. We don't use that as a mechanism in doing that. But like Elaine explained, you could have the most uncomplicated system ever as you simply have a piece of paper and a pen and a clipboard outside of the room and one on the inside, and you ask people to fill that out. When you do that though, I would encourage you either that people always have their phones on them, because phones generally have the same times, or you put a phone up, another phone, a clock up in the space where you actually have that the time that people write stuff down, because I used to go to facilities and they'd use a log, which honestly, to be honest, it's really easy to audit. It's not really complicated, but they wouldn't put a clock up, so everyone was using different times, and it got bad for them because it was something silly that if they just put up one clock, everyone would use the exact same time. But yeah, no, unfortunately, we don't accept the cameras as that. We actually ask you that at minimum, something like a paper log would be sufficient. And we do encourage it generally to be on the inside and the outside of the doors, just because people forget when they're walking out because they're not seeing it behind them. So when you're walking out of the door, it's in front of you, and when you're walking into the door, it's in front of you on either side. You can do it another way, for sure, but if you want an uncomplicated way that has no cost really tied to it, something as simple as 2 paper logs on either side of a door would be sufficient.
And keeping in mind too that if you are using like the paper log for that, is that you still do have your retention requirements for that. So don't just throw the paper out after the end of the day. It's making sure you make a copy of that and you keep that copy for 2 years.
Okay, another question kind of related to the earlier slides about co-location of nursery and micro cultivation and processing facilities. How does Health Canada define a site, and would like a physical barrier between the nursery and the cultivation component suffice?
So we don't define a site. We actually ask you guys to define your site. So I think what you're saying is, could I have a piece of land that I chose to put a micro cultivation license site into, and I also put a nursery license site into? Is that kind of what you guys are trying to get at here?
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you could do that. So you can have a parcel of land, but the most important thing is that the sites could not be distinct. So they couldn't be one site together. It would have to be separate sites. So you'd have to have, in the case that you're going for a micro cultivation site and you're also going for a nursery site, they would have to have separate physical barriers, and they would have to operate as completely, they would almost operate like they're totally, completely separate. So they have to have separate.
I just want to echo Jackie's sentiments there. Thank you so much for having us. We love to do this type of reach out. We love to hear your questions, from the people on the ground. We definitely look at things from a bureaucratic lens, and being able to see a little bit more from those who are actually doing the work is really valuable to us, to help us make sure that the industry is successful.
Okay.
See you guys later. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye. I'm going to invite Dave from DHC to come up and just give us a little bit.
So you can speak to all of everybody?
Local technology integrator. We deal in electronic security, networking systems, etc.
Can you speak louder? We can't hear you.
Right on. Across many industries, including the cannabis industry, we've done a. Is that better? Is this better? Yeah. Right on. We've done a large LP in the East Kootenays, as well as retail and microsites in this area. So my intent is more to look at the practical application of how you can apply physical and electronic security. So we'll look at a high-level overview of access control, physical security cameras, etc. So we'll start with access control. So what is access control? The technical definition is a system that consists of software and electronic hardware to control physical access through a door or any point of entry. So this might include door hardware, key fob readers, electric door controls, or even biometric and facial recognition devices. So some of the benefits that apply to this type of industry is the automated logging of entry and exit to a facility. So a key part of the Health Canada guidelines for a standard processor is to keep those records. If you can automate the collection of that, it's a lot easier than the manual records, paperwork, etc. You can set time and date restrictions. So specific staff or contractors say the janitor can come in between 8 and 9 p.m. Very easy to define that. Specific people can only go to specific doors at specific times. So for example, if staff are only authorized to access the storage room and not a shipping room, that can easily be defined. And credential replacement. So if you lose a key fob, no problem, a few dollars to replace that, better than rekeying the entire facility. So access control can be used on any kind of man door, gate, overhead door, bollard system, or any type of point of entry. So intrusion detection, it can be a part of an access control system, however it serves a slightly different purpose. Access control prevents physical entry, whereas intrusion detection will detect someone who has entered a space that shouldn't be there. So motion detectors, shock sensors, glass breaks, etc. Both systems work together. So physical security and hardware. Generally we deal with doors, locks, fencing, gates, bollards, or similar. There's some best practice design suggestions. So the photo here, it shows a relatively good electric lock set. Seems all right, but it's a glass door. So in this case, it wouldn't make any sense for a grow facility to have glass that could be broken right next to a door. If it was a retail facility or a storefront, maybe it's okay, but then I would put the film on the door or have a shutter or screen system that would work as well. Sorry? Tesla glass, yes. So other considerations include full height astragals. So a full height astragal would be a metal interlocking plate that covers the latch side of a door. So So if you install that from top to bottom, it makes it very difficult to pry a door open. Very inexpensive and very effective. Properly anchoring your door frames using hinges with non-removable pins, automatic door bottoms and locking hinge pins are also a good idea. So a determined attacker can usually get through a door or other entry. The key is slowing them down so the electronic security systems kick in. So as they mentioned in the presentation, early detection is ideal, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. Another consideration is building code versus security measures. So you need to make sure that the hardware is designed in a manner that it's still allowing free egress from the space without preventing fire exit. So physical security also includes locking devices. So generally you'll see consultants and designers will specify electric strikes, which is on the left. An electric strike is, it's okay, they're cheap and they'll check the compliance box, but in practice it's generally a poor choice. They're difficult to align, set up, and require use of external devices. So we'll use them if we have to, but we tend to avoid it. Electric cylindrical lock is the center lock. It's a good choice for lower security internal doors like a mechanical closet or an office. And my favorites are electric mortise locks on the left or a surface rim device up top. So a surface rim device is mounted on the door. It's completely on the inside, so there's no physical components in the latch side of the door that can be pried or accessed. And you could even increase the security of that device by installing top and bottom rods, so the door could lock in three locations. So each scenario is different. Definitely recommend speaking with a locksmith or a hardware specialist to find the right product for your application. And don't strictly rely on your builder or designer to copy and paste the door hardware specs. So CCTV or closed circuit camera systems are used minimum for visual monitoring. Basic system provides simple recording and live viewing. So decide up front if you just want to meet the basic requirement or if an enhanced system is more appropriate. So the product quality varies greatly. There's offshore manufacturers like Lorex or Hikvision are inexpensive but nowhere near as reliable or robust as North American product. Axis, Vigilon, or Bosch are good examples. We definitely recommend sticking with an onshore product. It's also important to consider the differences between an all-in-one solution that may incorporate viewing, camera power, and recording to a single device, or a video management system that runs on standard computer hardware or a cloud service. So to meet Health Canada's duration of storage requirements, it's often more flexible to use a video management system. My personal preference is a Vigilon. They're a Vancouver company that has a very robust product. So one of the more advanced features of a camera system is called analytics. So an analytic system will detect objects, generally people and vehicles, acting in a defined manner. So here you can see the system has identified a number of people, cars, and even a motorbike. So you can define a virtual line and write a rule. So if a person or a vehicle behaves in a certain manner, you can alert or alarm based on that. So in this case, you might want to know if a person crosses the street. If they continue crossing the street without stopping, that's okay. If they stop in the middle of the street and loiter, then you may want to create an alert and send that out. So practically in the cannabis industry, a regular application is to create a virtual fence line. So if someone crosses the line, the system will alert. If it's something like a bear or trees blowing in the wind, that would generally cause a false alarm. You won't see that. So the object classification is quite effective. So the key is early detection and reaction. So if we can detect someone as they're coming towards a site and send out an alert, it reduces the chance that they'll come right into the building. So automated response is another popular application. We have customer sites that will flash lights or chirp a siren or play a loud voice recording to discourage potential intruders. If they proceed further, the system will alarm and report to the monitoring station. So you could say, like, you're being detected, generally they're going to run off in a few seconds, even if it is a recorded process. So system integration, all modern security systems rely on standard IT and computer networking principles. So ensuring your facility has a robust network is quite important. We suggest when designing your technology platform, consider everything together. So security, computer systems, telecom, Wi-Fi, automated building controls, lighting controls, intercoms, and similar. There's a lot of packages like Ample or other processing packages that integrate these facilities quite well. So before starting a project, very carefully capture your requirements, define the intent, and look at your business process and what innovations you have. From there, move through site planning, implementation, commissioning, validation, training, and most importantly, accurate documentation. Another thing to consider is licensing for security in British Columbia. So you require a specific license to perform this type of work, so it's good to check with whoever you're hiring to make sure that they have that. And definitely question your consultants. So the metal cladding in the secure storage room was a requirement in the past, maybe not now. Is it a good idea to install it? Absolutely, but is it required? Maybe not, you can figure that out. But we see a lot of that on the electronic side as well. And if it's a basic micro system, you don't really need anything, but it might be a good idea. So consider what your business intent is and how it's going to impact security to your site that's in the middle of nowhere. You might want to know if someone's approaching it. So there's lots of options. Is there any questions? I can answer those. Go ahead.
One thing that stood out for me in the discussion was the talk about the result of a power outage having a bridge on your system.
Yeah.
A little bit bewildered here in Nelson as to what infrastructure might be involved in the cost.
Right. So a general intrusion alarm or access control system, there's small gel cell batteries, and you can stack those quite extensively to get 24 hours, 36 hours if you want. On the video surveillance side, it gets a little bit more difficult because the power runs, or the equipment takes more power. We've installed battery systems that will last for 6-8 hours. Beyond that, it's a good idea to have a generator.
Yeah, so in town, it's not practical to have a generator in a way.
You could, like us in town, we have a natural gas generator. So it mounts on the roof of the building. It'll kick in if the power goes out. It's very effective.
But that sort of low voltage relay that you had for the cameras, that's a system that runs in any approximate ideas to how much that sort of system, like not doing a generator.
Right. One that we put in another site was $1,200.
Yeah,
so it's not a huge amount, no.
And that would satisfy as far as you would validate?
Yeah, like the one that they passed their inspection, it was fine.
The camera storage is minimum 1 year, unless there's an incident, it's minimum 2 years.
That's correct.
Is that all cameras on premise?
No, just the ones that are related to that specific event. So one of the features of the Avigilon and other video monitoring systems is you can bookmark or tag a specific event, and you can set an expiration time on it. So maybe you'll keep that for 2 years or export it and save it. And there's no need to have a major amount of storage for something like that.
But it was a 1 year for all data?
Yes.
Right, so your minimum for all data is 1 year?
Correct.
So what's your estimated storage, just for a low-level camera, storage years worth of data?
It varies so much.
Terabytes, are we not?
Absolutely, yeah. We've had other sites, the larger LP that we did, we put enough storage in for 6 months, and then we watched it to see how much traffic they were recording. And then after that, we increased the storage to satisfy the requirement. So, like cloud services, a VMS system that's based on standard computer hardware, it's much easier to increase and manage that storage than a proprietary box that you'd buy at Costco.
And now for the potential power outages, I guess the internet would most likely stay online, but is there some type of backup for that you'd have to have? Or?
Yeah, it depends what you're using for monitoring. So generally we'd have internet primary, cellular secondary. Okay. The internet service, it depends if it's who your provider is. If it's a fiber or a wireless service, it would generally continue. Yes?
Who's the local monitoring company?
We do our own monitoring, but we contract to a company out of Vancouver. So there's no one locally that provides a service like that.
Who are they in Vancouver?
We use a company called Landvac. There's many that do the same thing.
And do you know if the generators are needed for the evidence package?
I don't think they are, because the other ones passed and there was no issue with that. They just had to prove that there was a way to maintain operation in the event of a power outage. They don't necessarily ask, well, what happens if the power's out for 2 days? You could technically get a portable generator and plug that in to run your security system and have that written into your operation plan. It's probably fine. Yes?
A recommended system?
Well, it depends how crazy you want to go. And we've been from $15,000 to $100,000. Yeah, just depending on how much you want to do. So a micro system, is it a good idea to have surveillance everywhere? Absolutely. It just depends how far you want to go. We can give you specific recommendations on specific projects if you'd like, but that's kind of the range that we would generally start to talk in.
So a question about outdoor grows. So standards are spanning like sometimes hundreds of meters.
Yes.
How do you accurately and reliably get data across those kinds of spans?
For surveillance purposes and monitoring, yeah. So good question. Generally, for an outdoor site, you will have to have a fence line. There are systems that you would hardwire a wire across the fence that can go many distances. Generally, what we recommend is using the analytics cameras instead. So we would figure out how many cameras you need around the perimeter, define that virtual line, and report that back if there's an intrusion. As far as physically connecting the cameras, your distance with standard Ethernet is 90 meters. 90. But if you use fiber optics, you can connect that at any distance. So the other sites, we would run a fiber optic cable around the perimeter to pick up those cameras and go from there, or use a fixed wireless back to the main site. So there's many different ways to do it. Yes?
Does camera coverage count as a physical barrier?
It's not a physical barrier, no. If you have a physical fence and you're using the camera to detect if someone crosses that line with the analytics function, then that would serve as your intrusion detection component of that physical barrier. Yes? ExploreNet would be terrible. So that's a satellite-based service, so your latency to get up and back is bad. It would be okay for standard alarm signals, but if you try and push video of it, there's some major problems. ExploreNet also, they use a feature called double NAT, so they take all of your information and restrict what you can do with it in many ways. So it's not, we've done video on ExploreNet before, it's not great. Columbia Wireless is okay. We're using that at other sites right now that are in the backwoods. Yeah, and they have their issues, but if that's all you're stuck with, it does have the capability of sending enough information. We negotiated a specific package and service for this one location that has been reliable. So, but we can talk specifics. Anyone else? All right, and we're happy to discuss further. We also own and operate two-door lock in Nelson, and all the physical hardware, steel doors, etc. We can handle the whole package. So Patrick and Adam are here as well if you have any other questions or want to talk specifics about your projects.
Do you have laser-guided drones?
That's, of course. So you could use that as an automated response for someone crossing the virtual line. So if you look on YouTube, there's a company that makes a remote-operated gun that fires small plastic pellets too. So would I install one? Probably not, but do whatever you want. All right.
All right, thank you for everyone for coming. Anna, you had an event coming up at the end of the month. Did you want to? Sure. All right.
I'm Anna Bunchu. I'm promoting and putting on an event here in Nelson called Critical Factors for Cannabis Facility Success. Stephanie Olstrander and I are working together to put this on. She's been successfully putting on these networking events for the last 5 years in Edmonton. It's proven to be very educational, great networking event. We have speakers from Keystone Labs to speak with people about all the complications of getting your testing done for microbials, etc. Jody's coming in to speak to you to answer your questions. We also have Cooper coming in to talk about integrative pest management systems and how to set up your business correctly. Not so much one-for-one, we've got thrips, use this, but more on an intellectual property basis, so that'll be an interesting conversation. And then NCAN is coming from Kelowna. They're a processor, and so we've asked them to come and deliver content for your vendor validation. What would they want from you once you're ready to sell your product to a processor? So that's a whole nother conversation of looking under the sheets at that part of the supply chain. And then I'm going to speak about my experience of learning quality assurance. I've taken a quality assurance course, and I know that we don't need a QAP for micros, but there's a certain hat that we're going to have to wear for business processes. I'm going to ask Community Futures for this contact for this event out to all the participants. Hopefully we can do that so that you're all well informed as to where you can get tickets. The event is February the 26th. That's a Wednesday. It's a full day event from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. Lunch is included with your $15 ticket. We've had a lot of sponsors who are going to cover the overhead of the majority of this event. But in the evening, we're also going to have a catered event. The dinner and networking will be held at the Falls. That's a $35 ticket, and Alligator Pie is our, will be serving us some delicious food as we've got some music and cash bar. So if you're interested in this event or following any of the other events that we are going to be hosting, please come speak to me. Thanks.